Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
The diplomatic language is gone as US Secretary of State Kerry verbally attacks Russia's Foreign Minister Lavrov over the broken ceasefire in Syria. He accuses the Russians of shielding a regime that has killed aid workers and dropped poison gas on its own people. He has demanded the complete grounding of all planes over northern Syria. Tonight, with the international powers at loggerheads, how much more dangerous can Syria become amid the worst East-West standoff since the end of the Cold War?
Also on tonight's programme, violent protests in North Carolina after another African-American man is shot dead by police. Officers dispute his family's claims he was unarmed, sitting in his car reading a book. The not-so-caring sharing economy. The home-letting website Airbnb is accused of allowing council tenants to play havoc with the rental market, to the detriment of hundreds of thousands on the waiting list. And it's all over bar the shouting. Voting has closed in Labour's leadership election, with both candidates appealing for the party to come together. But how?
Plus, we talked to the German director of the award-winning Victoria and Albert Museum in London about his decision to leave his post and the United Kingdom over Brexit.
It's always difficult to talk about history repeating itself, but if we talk about awareness on not being aware of what's going on, I mean, the late 20s have a lot of similarities.
It was an angry, damning and coruscating speech. US Secretary of State John Kerry, addressing the UN Security Council this afternoon, said the international community had reached a moment of truth. He claimed the country's future was hanging by a thread, and yet efforts so far to get Syrian parties to negotiate have been woefully inadequate. And in a desperate bid to save the ceasefire deal, he demanded all planes be grounded in key areas of Syria to avoid any further airstrikes. Heavy air raids continued in and around Aleppo today, as did the war of words between the US and Russia over who is to blame for the strike on the UN aid convoy on Monday. Our Foreign Affairs correspondent, Jonathan Rugman, joins us now from the United Nations in New York. Jonathan.
John, we have witnessed here at the United Nations a TV showdown between the Russians and the Americans, which we haven't really seen very often since the Cold War ended. The Americans accusing the Russians of living in a, quote, parallel universe when it comes to the truth of what is happening in Syria. The Americans are also talking about some kind of no-fly zone, the sort of thing many people have been talking about for years. But the Americans are not talking, they're not using the phrase no-fly zone, and we don't quite know what they mean by that yet. And what chance anyway of that working when the Russians are continuing to deny any involvement in Monday night's attack on an aid convoy? The Russian Defense Ministry has issued a statement this evening saying that a US Predator drone flying from Turkey was seen near the convoy just before the attack. So not actually blaming the Americans for the attack, but suggesting that they might have been involved. Here's my report on the day's events here at the United Nations. It was, in the words of the UN Secretary-General, a sickening and savage attack on an aid convoy near Aleppo, which left around 20 people dead. Red lines have come and gone in this conflict. These smouldering trucks now form another. The Americans claim a Russian Su-24 warplane was responsible, and UN officials hope this outrage will prove the turning point that previous outrages have not.
We are at a make or break moment. The Syrian tragedy shames us all. The collective failure of the international community should haunt every member of this council.
The Russian Defense Ministry has produced this drone video of the convoy, claiming what it called a terrorist pickup truck can be seen alongside. The footage possibly contradicting previous denials of any Russian involvement.
And we insist on a very thorough and impartial investigation of the attack on the humanitarian convoy. Many said that it could have been a rocket or an artillery shelling. That was what the initial reports were. Then helicopters or warplanes were mentioned. So I think we need to refrain from emotional reactions and make comments immediately.
But from the Americans today, this blistering response to the breakdown of the ceasefire.
I listened to my colleague from Russia, and I sort of felt a little bit like they're sort of in a parallel universe here. It's been shredded by independent actors, by spoilers who don't want a ceasefire. We just can't do business as usual. We can't walk out of this room and say, okay, we're going to try to continue, or we'll have a ceasefire that everybody knows can't work.
Mr. Kerry said the attack had lasted 2 hours, that when American jets bombed Syrian soldiers at the weekend, they had at least acknowledged it as an accident, while the number of Russian explanations for this continues to mount.
The trucks and the food and the medicine just spontaneously combusted. Anybody here believe that? I mean, this is not a joke. We're in serious business here.
There are only two possible culprits, only two forces that are capable of having carried out that strike, flying in that area. They are the Syrians and the Russians, and we have our doubts about the Syrian capability to fly at night. And so you're left with a pretty strong conclusion, as you'll have been hearing.
And it can only have been Syrian or Russian jets which hit the town of Talbise in Homs province today. Opposition activists said 2 people were killed and 30 injured. While these white helmet rescuers in eastern Aleppo have clearly heard an airstrike and can be seen scrambling to respond. All this prompting a change from the Americans, who are now talking of a flying ban in certain areas.
I believe that to restore credibility to the process, we must move forward to try to immediately ground all aircraft flying in those key areas in order to de-escalate the situation and give a chance for humanitarian assistance to flow unimpeded. And if that happens, there's a chance of giving credibility back to this process.
Any such flight ban is too late to save at least 4 medical workers who were reported killed in an airstrike here in the town of Khan Tuman, south of Aleppo yesterday. Though these pictures don't show rebel fighters who have also broken the ceasefire across Syria. A ceasefire still being touted by diplomats here, even though it's painfully obvious that the warring parties abandoned it days ago. Jonathan Rugman, Channel 4 News, New York.
Well, we're joined now by Natalia Narishniskaya, a former vice chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the Russian Duma, now the president of the Russian-funded think tank, the Institute of Democracy and Cooperation. And from New York, the deputy spokesman for the US State Department, Mark Toner. Mark Toner, how confident is the United States now that you know who bombed that convoy?
Well, I thought Secretary Kerry, and you guys, I'm glad you played some clips from his remarks earlier today in the UN Security Council, was very clear in laying out the facts as we know it. And in fact, he said that. He said everyone's entitled to their own opinions, but no one's entitled to their own facts. He laid out the facts of the case. Only the Syrian regime, only the Russians were flying in that airspace at that time, or capable of flying in that airspace at that time. I don't want to speak to whatever intelligence we may have about that incident, but we're fairly confident as to what happened.
Ms. Narishniskaya, let's just have a look at what John Kerry said. He is saying that there have been 4 major agreements in which Russia was a party to making those agreements. He says every single one of them has been broken. He asks, what is the point of making any agreements if they're constantly breached?
Oh, I wouldn't agree with that notion, because a lot is at stake in Syria, the peace in Europe, how much more dangerous ISIL must become to to be understood that it's a major danger. You know, when our defense ministry denies Russian involvement in this, I tend to believe them, not because I'm Russian, believe me, but because the first question we are asking ourselves in such situation, cui bono? Russia certainly is not, does not benefit from that. The Syrian army, the Syrian, as you put it, regime, the legitimate President Assad can't be interested because he knows that everything would be used against him, and he is already depicted almost as a monster who eats up every day a baby girl for supper to live happily ever after.
All right, well, let me put some of that to Mr. Toner. Let me put some of that to Mr. Toner.
There is no proof still. We must investigate. There are no craters. Our defense ministry tries to attract the attention that there are no craters that usually are left after any bombing.
Right.
So,
well, I don't think tonight we're going to. We're not going to, with respect.
ISIL could not be interested in cooperation of Russia and the United States. It's only so. I quite.
Natalia, with respect, we're not going to resolve this tonight in a 5-minute interview. So let me go to Mark Toner and just ask you, is it a firm proposal that Mr. Kerry is making that all flights over northern Syria should now be stopped? And if there is such a flight, does it mean that America will attack it?
Well, obviously, he presented an idea today. And let's be clear, this was part of the plan. Had we gotten to the 7 days of reduced violence, we would have been able to implement this joint coordination center with Russia, and the regime would have been basically grounded within that designated area. But we're not there. I think what he's offering now is a way forward that can restore confidence in a possible ceasefire. And he's calling for, I think, drastic action because of what we've seen over the past several days, and certainly on with the attack on the humanitarian convoy a few days ago.
Let me put this to Natalia Narochnikskaya. Let's ask you. It does seem logical, doesn't it? If somebody is bombing innocent people in Aleppo, it seems logical to say, let's stop all flights over Aleppo. Would Russia agree with that?
I'm not a military and have never served in army, so I believe there might be consideration that once all planes are on the ground, the ISIL immediately will attack and will take back the Aleppo. So, but I believe that although the situation has aggravated, of course, to the very dangerous point, I mean, between Russia and the United States, but still, I wouldn't dramatize it. Everything is in the hands of our both countries who can sit down at table and negotiate the compromises. And of course, every expert knows that the problem is in the ultimate goal of Syrian destiny.
Let me put that to Mark Toner. How low is trust now? I mean, if you're going to sit down at a table, there's no point sitting down if there's no trust between you. And it sounds very much tonight, from listening to Mr. Kerry, as if there is no trust.
John, what I'd say is we've sat down at the table, and Secretary Kerry pointed to this. We've had agreement time and time again over the past months, and indeed in Geneva a little over a week ago, on a way forward. And Secretary Kerry ended with 2 important points. He said, I know this agreement that we reached in Geneva is not perfect, but there's no better alternative out there. This is the best opportunity that we have to get a ceasefire in place and a political negotiation in place that will end the fighting. And secondly, he said this is not time for business as usual. And I think what he meant by that is we have to try to to restore confidence, to restore some kind of level of trust. And that's what's going to be the main goal. The ISSG, the International Syria Support Group, is going to meet again tomorrow. They're going to talk about this proposal. They're going to talk about the way forward and next steps that we can somehow salvage what was reached in Geneva last week.
Mark Turner, Natalia Naroshniskaya, thank you very much indeed for talking with us.